I'm Tanya. I am 31 years old. With my red hair, white skin, and green eyes, I am what most people would describe as a beautiful woman. From the outside, my life seems to be perfect. A happy marriage, a loving wife, a 3-year-old daughter. But the reality is not always what it seems from the outside. My husband Ethan and I were passionately in love. He was the strongest, most charismatic man I've ever known, but he was married at the time, and I was engaged. At first, I tried to resist him, but my feelings overrode everything else. In the end, I left everything behind for him, and he left his wife for me, and we got married. At first, we were very happy. We were passionate about each other, or so I thought. What happened in the last few months turned my whole world upside down. This quote was exactly what I was going through. The one who destroys a home has no home. And now here I am, telling you everything that happened. Because it's killing me to keep this story inside. I don't know what to do. What would you do? When I met Ethan, my life was completely different. I was a young, ambitious, career-oriented woman. I had planned my future. I had a clear path ahead of me, and Ethan was not on it. Because Ethan was my boss, and Ethan was married. The first years were completely professional. He was a strong, charismatic man that everyone in the business admired. I was hardworking and disciplined and focused on my goals, and my fiancé Marcel was a great guy who cherished me. But then something changed between us. I don't remember exactly when it happened, maybe one of those late hours alone in the office, maybe the first time he really looked at me differently. At first, it was a seemingly innocent intimacy. Our conversations over coffee in the morning started to last longer. In meetings, we started to wait a little longer when everyone left. We started to pay attention to each other's sentences, to notice the hidden meanings behind what we said. But most dangerously, we started to feel. One day in the office, after everyone had left, we both realized that we had been watching each other for too long without realizing it. We shouldn't do that, I said, but I didn't know what I was objecting to. Ethan smiled slightly. Yeah, but we're still here. And then he came closer to me. That night we kissed, and with that kiss, we started down a path of no return. We were both risking everything for the first time in our lives, but we didn't care. After that, it was uncontrolled. I couldn't help myself when I was with him. Every space I found, we were uncontrollably having each other. We met in every gap, stole every moment, mingled at every opportunity. Hotels, secret messages, hangover guilt. But the biggest truth was that we were both burning with love. Ethan eventually left his wife, and I left my fiancé. He cheated on his wife. I cheated on my fiancé. But we both just had to fight for each other, and we won. We got married. But you know, some victories aren't the hardest part of the battle. When Ethan and I moved in together, it started out so well. He was the first thing I saw when I opened my eyes in the morning. We didn't have to hide anymore. I was his only woman. For a long time, it was like a dream. But as time passed, this love turned into a cage. I didn't realize it at first. One morning, when I was getting ready for work, he looked at me long and hard. "Isn't this skirt a little too short?" I smiled at first. "You never said such things before." He shrugged. "You weren't just mine before." "It was just a joke," I said. I didn't dwell on it. But then, when I wanted to go out in the evening with my friends, he got annoyed. "What are you doing out so late?" Then at work, much more happened. The man who supported me in the days when we worked together started to hinder me after we got married. He interfered in my decisions. He always wanted to control me. Being in the same workplace was no longer an advantage. It was a prison. The man who used to want to see me even on my way to work was now jealous of me sharing things with others. Over time, he made it clear that he didn't want me to work. Sometimes with small pressures, "You are so tired when you come home from work, you should take time for yourself." And sometimes with direct orders, "You don't need to work, Tanya. You have to take care of our home." But I loved my job. Everything that made me who I was being taken away. Finally, I got pregnant, and that's when Ethan got what he wanted. I had to do what was best for my baby. I stopped working. He told me to take a break for a while, but I knew. It was an irreversible decision. I became an ordinary housewife. We didn't go to the same job anymore. We didn't share the same dreams. We weren't even the same people. I was trapped inside the house. And at that point, that sentence was engraved in my mind. He who destroys a home has no home. I had once ruined someone else's life too. He was someone else's husband. I was someone else's fiancé. We shattered hearts so we could be together. And now I was shattered too. Was it always going to be like this? If you're paying for what you've done, how do you know when to stop? Where had the old Tanya gone? When I closed my eyes, I kept seeing the same image in my mind. The early days with Ethan, the intense love, the passion, the excitement, the overwhelming feeling I got when I looked at him. Now, I was trapped in a cage, and when I looked at Ethan, I saw a guard standing over me. The days at home had become a routine. My daughter and I had no one else. There was life out there, and I wasn't part of it. Ethan. He was going to work as usual, meeting his friends, living his life, and I was trapped in a house, slowly becoming a fading shadow. But then, the day came. A big shopping center had opened in the city, new brands, luxury stores. Everyone was talking about it. I thought, maybe it would be good to get some air. I put my daughter's coat on and went out. For the first time in a long time, I was actually mingling with people. As soon as I entered the mall, I was dumbfounded. Stylish people, sparkling stores, the smell of coffee. It was as if I had stepped into another world. I stood in front of a store, looking at the window display, undecided whether to go in or not. And just then, I saw him, Mark, my ex-fiancé. I gasped. Something inside me stirred so much that my heart began to beat so hard that it couldn't fit in my chest. He had changed completely. The Mark I used to know was gone. There was a completely different person standing in front of me. His shoulders were broadened, his body was shaped, he had a charismatic stance. His suit fit him perfectly. The man who had once been young and inexperienced was now a respected businessman. And worst of all, his eyes were still the same. He looked at me in such a way that all the memories of the past flashed before my eyes. I don't know how long we stood like that. Time seemed to stop. Then he slowly approached me. "Tanya?" I gasped again. I didn't know what to say. Even if I opened my mouth, the words wouldn't come out. But then I pulled myself together. "Mark." It was strange to even say his name. He looked me up and down. There was both curiosity and traces of the past in his eyes. "How's it going?" The question was simple, but it carried so much meaning. "Fine," I mumbled. I knew I was lying, and so did he. Mark nodded slightly. His eyes shifted to my daughter for a moment. Then he turned back to me. "If you have time, why don't we sit down and have a coffee?" For a moment I panicked. Everything inside me was screaming, yes. But my logic, I was married, what I did was wrong. And worst of all, Ethan would kill me if he found out. I looked at him and smiled hesitantly. "Maybe another time." He smiled slightly. "Okay, but I'm sure there will be another time." Something stirred somewhere inside me. That night, the moment I closed my eyes, Mark's face appeared in my mind. I thought about the way he looked at me. I felt that old, familiar warmth, but it wasn't the Mark I knew anymore. He was strong now. He was confident. Even in his presence, I felt how vulnerable I was. But that had to be a mistake, right? I tossed and turned for hours, unable to sleep, Mark's voice echoing in my ears. And in the morning, I opened my eyes to a notification on my phone. "Mark, I can't wait to meet you. Shall we have coffee?" I looked at the screen for a long time. It's just a coffee, right? What could it be? We were adults, there was nothing wrong. So why was my heart beating so fast? There was confusion inside me. My fingers trembled on the keyboard. Should I have written no? But I didn't. "Okay, what time?" The answer came immediately. "Mark, are you free around 3 in the afternoon?" I was, but it wasn't just coffee. The moment I thought about it, I wanted to dress up for the first time in a long time. I left my daughter with my mom for the afternoon and got ready to go to the mall. I hadn't looked at myself so carefully in the mirror for a long time. I combed my hair carefully, put on a light makeup. I wanted to feel beautiful. I wanted to be with someone who saw me beautiful. I don't know if Ethan noticed. He glanced at me at breakfast but didn't say anything. I met Mark at a quiet cafe in the far corner of the mall. His eyes lit up when he saw me. "Tanya, you look great as always." I was a little embarrassed. "Thank you." After we ordered, we talked about the past for a while. The atmosphere was cozy. We were laughing, talking. Then Mark became serious. Tanya, I've actually known what you've been going through for years. I blinked, puzzled. What do you mean? He took a deep breath. This is a small town. I've always heard from old friends, mutual acquaintances, what you've been through, how you've been. I've always known. I felt a shiver run through me. Was this possible? So, you've been watching me? I asked, my voice trembling slightly. He smiled. No, Tanya, but every time I tried to forget you, I heard about you from someone, your name, your life, and I could never stop thinking about you. Something inside me broke when I heard those words. I, who had forgotten for years that I was loved, was now remembering the past with Mark's voice. This moment was too much. It was too dangerous. I pulled myself together. I have to go, I said, averting my eyes. Mark didn't say anything. He just nodded. I stood up and held out my hand for a handshake, and he did too. But all of a sudden, as we shook hands, we leaned over and gave each other a kiss on the cheek. And at that moment, for a second, our lips touched. We both held our breath. Within seconds, I pulled back, my heart beating like crazy. I'm leaving. And I rushed out of the cafe. That night, every time I closed my eyes, I thought about Mark, his touch, his voice, those few seconds. It was so wrong. But what I felt was just as strong. Was what I did betraying Ethan? No, it couldn't have been. But why did I feel this way? Mark's message came 3 days later. Mark, Tanya, can I see you again? I picked up the phone and took a long look at it. Should I have said no? Was it just a coffee? Part of me was like, don't do this. But the other voice had already written the answer. Where is it? That day when Mark texted me again, I was strangely excited. Mark, meet me at the same place. I'm waiting for you. I hesitated for a moment. I shouldn't have gone this time, but then, why not? The excuses I gave myself were so easy. We were just going to have coffee. I'll pick her up in an hour or two, I told the attendant. And then, I quickened my pace to get to Mark, but when I got to the cafe, I shuddered. The whole mall was full of people, but the cafe was completely empty. I stopped. I looked in through the glass, dumbfounded. How could this have happened? I pushed the door and went inside. The silence was so thick I could hear my heart beating. Mark was sitting in the most secluded corner of the cafe. His eyes were directly on me. I walked slowly to him. What's going on, Mark? Why is no one here? He smiled. It's just us today, Tanya. I close the cafe once a week. Today is a day off. This cafe and 4 to 5 other stores in the mall are mine. I felt a stirring inside me. Was it fear, excitement? I didn't know. Then why did we meet here? I asked. He looked at me calmly. It's like old times, just for the two of us. I stopped for a moment. I had to go, but I didn't go, because around Mark I felt something I hadn't felt in years, special. I'll get you some coffee, Mark said and headed for the kitchen. I turned around and looked at the empty tables in the cafe. It was crazy, but why did I like it? After a while, Mark returned with a cup of coffee. The coffee had gold leaves on it. My eyes widened. What's this? Something special for you, Tanya. I took the cup in my hand. I felt like a princess. This feeling, it was something I had forgotten for a long time. I let out a little laugh. Ethan wouldn't even make me coffee. Mark cocked his head, because he doesn't know what he has. I shuddered. This conversation was going somewhere very different. I realized that I hadn't had a man look at me like that in years. Years. Mark stared into my eyes. I never forgot you, Tanya. I swallowed. You were the biggest loss of my life. He grabbed my hand, and I didn't pull it back. Mark's warm hand was inside mine. It made me shiver. It excited me. I took a deep breath. Mark, we can't do this. But my voice was unconvincing. Mark looked into my eyes. Is that so, Tanya? Something inside me was screaming, yes. But another voice, no other voice could stop me. And then, Mark leaned in slightly. I didn't pull back. He placed a soft kiss on my lips. It only lasted a second, but it broke down all the walls inside me. I wanted to pull back, but I couldn't. There, in the nook of the cafe years later, the Mark I had abandoned was making me feel my womanhood again. I looked at the clock and oh my God, my daughter had been at the playground for 3 hours. I had to pick her up and go home immediately. I quickly pulled myself together and stood up, turned to Mark and said, "This is so wrong," and headed for the door. "Tanya, listen to me. I've had enough. I'm not leaving you anymore." I shook my head from side to side. No, this is wrong. We are in the past. But I didn't believe it either. Tanya, everything I earned, every money I had, every success, none of it meant anything. Nothing means anything without you. I shuddered inside. My legs were trembling. His words were like a knife in my heart, but I had to get away from him. I lowered my eyes to the ground. "I gotta go, Mark." I hurried out of the door. "Tanya!" There was a plea in her voice, but I didn't turn around. If he stopped me at that moment, I couldn't let go. I ran out of the cafe. I picked up my daughter, and the moment I got in the car, I started to cry. I couldn't help myself. That voice echoing inside me haunted me like the ghosts of the past. He who destroys a home has no home. But I had already caused a house to collapse. Now was I going to turn a blind eye to the destruction of my own home? No, I couldn't stand it. I couldn't stand it. That night, after Ethan fell asleep, I went to my room, grabbed my phone, texted Mark. "We have to talk. I have to run away." Mark's answer was only 3 words. "I'm waiting for you, Tanya." At that moment, I made my decision. I opened the closet. I took a small suitcase. I packed a few things for my daughter. And the next night, without saying a word to Ethan, I picked up my daughter and ran to Mark's house. When I arrived at Mark's house, he welcomed me with open arms. I held my daughter in my arms, and I couldn't describe what I felt. This place, it was like home. That night, Mark was with me as if he had been with me for years, and it was an incredible feeling. For the first time, I felt truly loved. I felt like a woman. I fell asleep peacefully in Mark's arms. Ethan was my past. Mark was my future. For the first time, I believed I was doing the right thing, until I woke up in the morning. I lay in bed. Mark wasn't there. I sat up, put my hair up. I went down the stairs to go downstairs. But when I got downstairs, I gasped. There was Ethan standing in the middle of the living room, next to my daughter. The anger in his eyes was more frightening than I'd ever seen it before. He held out his hand toward Mark. "So this is..." He shook his head from side to side. "Mark, did you really call me?" I froze. "Is this real?" Mark turned to me. He smiled, but it wasn't the same smile as before. It was cold. It was cruel. "Yes, Tanya," he said. "This is real." I stared at my husband. Ethan clenched his teeth. I could see his fist clenching. But the real blow came from Mark. He said, "I've been waiting for this moment." He came up to me slowly. "Do you remember how you left me, Tanya? Just when I thought I was the happiest I'd ever been, you cheated on me. You left me." The tone in her voice, it gave me goosebumps. "Do you remember how you ran to this man?" Something inside me broke. "Do you think I would forgive a woman like you?" I parted my lips but couldn't say anything. "No, Tanya, I had only one goal. To put you and this man through what you put me through." I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. Mark looked at me one last time. "You took everything from me, Tanya," he said, "and now I'm destroying you." Ethan was about to open his mouth when the man in front of him, not the loser he used to be, turned to him and told him to get the hell out of my house. Ethan took our daughter and left without a backward glance. I was stiff as a board. I wanted to beg to be branded. And Mark leaned back. He took a deep breath, and he just said, "This is life, Tanya. Now I can start a new life." There was nothing to say. She was right. What had I done? How had I fallen into such a trap? Did I deserve this? I ask you now, does a traitor deserve to be betrayed? Would you leave everything behind for someone you love? Do we always pay for what we do? Leave your comments. Show me the way. I am alone now. I have no one left. Don't forget to subscribe and like the channel.